Story disclaimer. This story is a work of fiction and is intended for entertainment purposes only. The content includes dark themes, horror elements, and fictional depictions of rituals and sacrifices that are purely imaginative and not reflective of any real-life practices or beliefs. Viewer discretion is advised. This video is not suitable for younger audiences, and parental guidance is recommended. The story does not endorse or promote any harmful behavior, violence, or dangerous activities. Please note that all characters, events, and settings are entirely fictional and created for the purpose of storytelling. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or actual events, is purely coincidental. In the next episodes, Chinedu's journey takes a dark turn as he confronts a new and mysterious force. Thrust into a shadowy realm, he faces trials that test his sanity and resolve, while uncovering the deep, ancient roots of the curse that binds him. Haunted by visions of his wife, Ngozi, and tempted by the lure of power, Chinedu must make impossible decisions to protect himself and those he loves. As the true nature of the darkness is revealed, he battles not just external enemies, but the lingering shadows within. Will he break free from this cycle or be consumed once more? Stay tuned for the twists and revelations that will shape his fate. Chinedu stood frozen, staring at the empty doorway where Ngozi had just been. In her place, something darker emerged. The air grew cold, the shadows deeper, and a sense of dread gripped his heart. The creature that stood in the doorway was not his wife, it was something else entirely. This new entity, tall and shadowy, had an aura of cold power. Its form was vague, shifting in and out of focus, but Chinedu could feel the malicious intent radiating from it. It grinned, though its face remained an abyss of darkness. "Where is she?" Chinedu demanded, though his voice trembled. His heart raced, blood pounding in his ears. The dark figure simply tilted its head, as though amused by his question. It raised its arm slowly, and the walls of the house groaned, as though the building itself was in pain. He felt the weight of ancient power in that moment, power that far exceeded his understanding. "You cannot reverse what has already been done," the dark figure whispered in a voice like the rustling of dead leaves. "Your wife is lost, as you will be." Chinedu's mind reeled. This was not the curse he had expected. The ritual he had so desperately hoped would free him from the darkness had instead unleashed something worse. But he had no time to process it. The darkness in the room grew, and as the figure slowly advanced toward him, he knew one thing for certain: escape was the only option. Chinedu ran. His heart pounded as he tore through the house, throwing open doors, trying to find an escape. But the darkness was everywhere, closing in on him. The walls were like traps, the floor itself seemed to shift beneath his feet. He stumbled into the garden, gasping for breath. There, at the edge of the lawn, a woman stood watching him, a familiar face, but one he could barely recognize. It was Ngozi, but different. Her once beautiful eyes were hollow, and her face was now a mask of emptiness. "Ngozi," he cried, rushing toward her. "What happened? What did I do?" She looked at him, her expression unreadable. "You freed me," she said, but her voice was hollow, like it came from a place far away. "But now, you will join me in the darkness." Before Chinedu could reply, she vanished, her form dissolving into the mist, leaving behind nothing but an eerie silence. Chinedu could feel the ground shift beneath him. He was not in Lagos anymore. The city had vanished, and in its place was a place of shadow and dust. The air was thick, heavy with a suffocating force. There were no sounds, no birds, no life, just darkness stretching endlessly. He stumbled forward, calling out for help, but his voice was swallowed by the void. Every step he took felt like a trap, each footfall echoing in a place that was neither here nor there. Suddenly, from the shadows, figures began to emerge, ancient ones, cloaked in tattered robes, their faces hidden beneath hoods. They moved with silent grace, their eyes glowing faintly in the dark. Chinedu froze. These were not ordinary people. They were part of something ancient, a cult that had existed for centuries, long before the city of Lagos was built. The dark presence he had unleashed had brought him to their domain. One of them stepped forward, his voice booming in the eerie silence. "You have entered the realm of the lost," he said, his voice like thunder. "Now, you will serve." Chinedu's heart raced as the dark cult members surrounded him. He could feel the pull of the ancient magic that bound this place together, its presence overwhelming. His mind began to break apart as he realized the full extent of what he had done. The curse had not only consumed Ngozi, it had pulled him into this ancient, hidden world. "You can't control this," Chinedu shouted, his voice cracking with fear. "You have to let me go." The cult members remained silent, their dark eyes fixed on him. He felt their will pressing against him, pushing him to submit. This was their world, their rules. The price of the ritual had been far higher than he ever imagined. One figure, an elder with a face like wrinkled stone, reached out and touched Chinedu's forehead. A jolt of pain shot through him, and suddenly, his vision was flooded with images, memories of every curse, every dark magic ritual that had ever been performed in Lagos. "Every choice," the elder whispered, "comes at a cost." Chinedu's mind spun. He was trapped. He had to find a way out before they claimed him forever. Chinedu struggled to keep his composure. He could feel the magic of the realm twisting around him, but he wasn't done yet. He couldn't give up. With every ounce of strength, he pushed back against the cult's influence. "You won't take me," he whispered through clenched teeth. Suddenly, the ground beneath him trembled, and the cult members staggered back, their faces filled with fear. Chinedu turned to see a woman standing before him, her form glowing with a faint light, an aura of power surrounding her. It was the oracle, the old woman who had first given him the charm. "Now is the time," she said, her voice echoing. "Now you must choose, live in this world of darkness, or fight to reclaim your life." Chinedu's heart raced. This was his last chance to break free, to save not just himself but his life in Lagos. He nodded. With a force he didn't know he had, he pushed forward, his hands outstretched toward the cult members. A blinding light erupted from his palms, and the dark world began to crack, its foundation crumbling. Chinedu's vision blurred as the world around him began to disintegrate. The cult members screamed as the darkness that had consumed them began to collapse, the ancient realm shattering like glass. The oracle's face remained calm, but her eyes glowed brighter with every passing second. She had been guiding him all along, preparing him for this final battle against the darkness. "Go back," she whispered, "but remember, nothing is ever truly gone. The darkness will always be waiting." Before Chinedu could reply, the rift in the air widened, swallowing him whole. Chinedu blinked as the familiar streets of Lagos reappeared before him. The city felt different, like a veil had been lifted from his eyes. He could hear the hum of life all around him, but the weight of what he had just endured hung heavy on his shoulders. He was back. But things were not as they seemed. Ngozi was gone or vanished, as though she had never been part of his life at all. The house he had once lived in was empty, stripped of all the memories he had clung to. And yet, as he walked through the streets, he noticed something. People were watching him. Not just anyone, but those who seemed to know more than they should. Their eyes followed him, whispering behind his back. The curse had not left entirely. It had followed him back into the real world. Chinedu thought he could return to his old life. But the darkness followed him, lingering just beneath the surface. He found himself avoiding the places he used to visit. His colleagues at the hospital seemed distant, their eyes filled with pity and something more. The world around him was distorted. His dreams were filled with shadows, whispers that clawed at his mind, telling him that the curse was far from over. It had only just begun. Chinedu couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching him. And then one day, as he sat alone in his office, the door creaked open, and a figure stepped in. It was Ngozi. Her eyes were hollow, her face a mask of sorrow. She reached out a hand, and in a voice that was barely more than a whisper, she spoke. "It's not over, Chinedu. You will never escape what you've started." Chinedu's life became a nightmare. Everywhere he went, the shadows were there, lurking. He could feel them watching him, waiting for the right moment to strike. The dark cult, the curse, it was all still there, alive in the corners of his world. He tried to move forward, to live a normal life, but the forces that had once been unleashed had claimed a part of him. The darkness was inside him now, and it would never let go. One day, as he walked down a busy Lagos street, he felt a chill run down his spine. He turned, and in the crowd, he saw a face he hadn't seen in years. It was the Oracle. And she was smiling. Years passed, but the darkness never left Chinedu. He grew old, his hair turning grey, but his soul remained trapped in the realm of shadows. Every night, the whispers grew louder, calling to him, reminding him that his curse had never been lifted. Chinedu lived with a constant feeling that he was being hunted, as though the darkness that had once consumed his wife and him had come back to claim everything. Even though he tried to forget the horrors of his past, they clung to him, gnawing away at the edges of his sanity. He had tried everything, rituals, prayers, even seeking the help of spiritual healers, but nothing could quell the dread. The Oracle had warned him. The darkness was a part of him now, and it would never be fully exorcised. One day, Chinedu was visited by an old acquaintance from his past, a former colleague named Mudiwa. Mudiwa had always been the skeptic, the one who refused to believe in anything that couldn't be explained by science. He had once ridiculed Chinedu's involvement with the dark rituals, but now, he appeared at Chinedu's door with a sense of urgency. "I've been having dreams," Mudiwa said, his voice strained. "Dreams about you, about the curse. I think it's not just your curse, Chinedu. It's bigger. It's affecting everyone." Chinedu frowned. "What are you talking about?" Mudiwa glanced around, as though afraid someone was listening. "It's spreading. People are starting to act differently. They are becoming obsessed with power. Desperate for control. It's like the curse you unleashed is feeding off them." The revelation sent a cold shiver down Chinedu's spine. This was far worse than he could have ever imagined. The darkness wasn't just contained within him anymore, it was growing, infecting others. As days passed, Chinedu began to notice the signs all around him. People he had known for years began changing. Colleagues who had once been kind and normal started exhibiting strange behaviors. They were becoming obsessed with material gain, power, and control, willing to sacrifice anything to climb higher. It wasn't just in the workplace. In his neighborhood, the once vibrant and peaceful community started to feel like a pressure cooker about to explode. Neighbors were fighting over trivial things. Families were torn apart over petty disputes. The energy in Lagos felt poisoned. And all the while, Chinedu was haunted by visions, images of the dark figure that had first appeared at his doorstep, the shadow that seemed to be pulling the strings from afar. He knew now, the curse was no longer just a personal tragedy. It was part of something bigger, something older and more dangerous. He had unleashed a force that had long been dormant, and now it was claiming not just his life, but the lives of everyone around him. Chinedu could no longer deny the truth. The world was changing, and it was changing because of him. The dark cult, the ancient magic, everything he had encountered was part of a cycle that had been repeating itself for centuries. The darkness wasn't just a curse, it was a force of nature, a sickness that preyed on the weak and the desperate. And now, it was time for the final confrontation. With Nudiwa's help, Chinedu found himself standing at the edge of the same old temple where the curse had first been unleashed. The air was thick with tension, as if the very ground beneath them was waiting for the inevitable. "You know what has to be done," Nudiwa said, his face grim. "You have to end this. If you don't, there will be no one left untouched." Chinedu nodded. He knew. He had to face the dark figure again. He had to confront the force he had unleashed, and put an end to it, no matter the cost. As he entered the temple, the walls seemed to close in around him. The darkness was alive, swirling and shifting, waiting for him. And then, from the shadows, the dark figure appeared once more. "You think you can stop me?" the shadow hissed. "You're nothing but a vessel. A puppet." Chinedu squared his shoulders. "I'm not afraid of you anymore." The figure laughed, the sound that echoed in the empty temple. "You should be." The battle was not one of fists or weapons. It was a battle of wills, of mind against ancient magic. Chinedu felt the dark energy trying to consume him, but he stood firm, channeling all his fear, all his anger, and every bit of power he had left. And then, just as the darkness seemed ready to devour him, something changed. The oracle appeared, her presence shimmering like a beacon in the gloom. She raised her hand, and the darkness began to shrink, its power weakening. "You are stronger than you think," she whispered. "You always have been." With one final push, Chinedu unleashed a burst of light so powerful it shattered the dark figure, breaking the curse once and for all. The shadows that had clung to him began to dissolve, their hold on him slipping away. The world shifted back to normal, as though the darkness had never been. The people who had been affected began to regain their old selves, their obsessions and fears fading into the background. The city of Lagos, once gripped by a strange tension, was now quiet and peaceful again. But for Chinedu, there was no relief. The curse had left a mark on his soul, and though the darkness was gone, its shadow lingered in his mind. The oracle had told him the truth, the darkness would always be there, but it was up to him to resist it. Chinedu stood alone in his now empty house, the silence overwhelming. He glanced at the remnants of his old life, the luxurious furniture, the grand decor, and the echoes of laughter that had once filled the air. It felt like a lifetime ago that Ngozi had filled his world with promises of power and riches. Now, those promises were nothing more than a haunting memory. He knew the battle had been won, but the fight against darkness, whether external or within himself, was far from over. Chinedu had broken the curse, but the temptation of power, the yearning for control, would always be waiting just out of sight. As he gazed out over the city, he made a silent vow, to resist the lure of darkness, to never let it claim him or anyone else again. But little did he know, the echoes of his past were far from over. Chinedu's heart was heavy. The peace he had hoped for was not complete. He had thought that after the curse was lifted, he could leave the darkness behind, but it was more complicated than that. Ngozi's voice, her obsession with power and wealth, still echoed in his mind. The shadows of their past continued to linger, and though the world had moved on, he couldn't escape the guilt and regret that tugged at his soul. One evening, as the sun dipped beneath the horizon, Chinedu found himself face to face with the woman he had once loved. Ngozi stood before him, the shell of the woman she used to be. Her eyes burned with an unnatural fire, and her voice was hollow, as though it no longer belonged to her. "Chinedu," she said, her voice laced with venom. "You will regret this. You could have everything, the power, the status, the life you always dreamed of. But you choose to leave me. You will pay the price." Chinedu didn't fear her anymore. He didn't fear the dark magic that had once bound him to her. What he feared most was losing himself in the same hollow pursuit of power that had claimed her. He had seen enough. I don't love you anymore, Ngozi, Chinedu said, his voice steady and final. I can't. You're not the person I married. And I'm not the man I was when we were together. Her face twisted with fury, but Chinedu turned his back to her, no longer willing to fight. He had already made his choice. He would not be dragged back into the darkness with her. In the days that followed, Chinedu was free of the dark forces that had once held him captive. He was no longer haunted by the rituals and curses that had once seemed like his only escape. But the road ahead wasn't easy. The life he had known with Ngozi was now a thing of the past, and he had to rebuild his world from the ground up. The children were a source of great pain for Chinedu. He had loved them deeply, but in the years of his marriage, he had grown distant, unable to connect with them as he once had. They were caught between two worlds, the mother who sought material wealth and power, and the father who now sought peace and redemption. But Chinedu wasn't willing to let them suffer in silence. He approached Ngozi, who was now a broken figure in the house, lost to the shadows she had courted. I'll take the children, Ngozi, he said softly. They need stability. They deserve a life free from your obsession. She looked at him with empty eyes, her mind still consumed by the darkness. She nodded, a single tear slipping down her cheek as she realized the price of her ambition. And so, Chinedu took full responsibility for the children. He moved out of the house with them, and for the first time in years, he felt a sense of peace. Though they were grieving the loss of their mother's affection, Chinedu made sure to give them love and security, offering them a life not of wealth and status, but of laughter and warmth. A few months later, Chinedu's life began to change in unexpected ways. As he focused on rebuilding his family and his career, he met a woman named Adesewa. She was a colleague at the hospital, the kind-hearted woman who had always shown a quiet strength. Unlike Ngozi, Adesewa didn't seek luxury or status. She was content with the simple joys of life, laughter, companionship, and meaningful work. It wasn't long before Chinedu found himself drawn to her. She supported him through his healing process, never once pressuring him to be anything other than himself. She brought back the laughter into his life that had been absent for so long. With Adesewa, he rediscovered the beauty of simple moments, the warmth of a shared cup of tea, the joy of a walk under the stars, and the serenity of simply being understood. Adesewa didn't care about what others thought of them. She didn't want the wealth or the status that Ngozi had so desperately chased. She cared about the person Chinedu was, the person he had become. As time passed, Chinedu's life started to feel more balanced. He remained close to his children, ensuring they were raised in an environment of love, not materialism. They flourished in this newfound stability, their laughter filling the house, and their sense of security growing stronger each day. Chinedu and Adesewa's relationship deepened. It wasn't about grand gestures or extravagant gifts, it was about building something real. They found joy in the small moments of everyday life, and that made all the difference. For the first time in years, Chinedu truly felt free. He had escaped the suffocating expectations that had once bound him. He had overcome the darkness that had threatened to consume him, and he had found love again, not the kind of love that came with conditions or ambitions, but the kind that was rooted in mutual respect, kindness, and joy. Chinedu's story was one of transformation. He had been trapped in a cycle of expectations, trapped by a marriage that suffocated him, trapped by the desire for wealth and status that had consumed his wife. But in the end, he had broken free. He had found love again, and more importantly, he had found peace. The children, now growing up in a home full of laughter and care, were thriving. They had been given a chance at a different life, one that was rooted in love, not materialism. Chinedu watched them grow with a sense of pride, knowing he had made the right choice. Ngozi, meanwhile, was left behind, consumed by her own ambitions and the darkness she had invited into her life. She remained isolated, a mere shadow of her former self, while Chinedu and his children moved forward into a brighter, more hopeful future. Chinedu had learned that the greatest power lay not in control or wealth, but in love, in laughter, and in finding peace within oneself. And for the first time in years, he was truly free. Despite the peace that had settled around him, Chinedu couldn't shake the sense that the darkness was still lurking within. Every now and then, his mind would wander back to the time when ambition consumed him, when the allure of power had blinded him to everything else. He had thought the curse was broken, but the shadow of his past still haunted him. He couldn't forget the cold, calculating woman Ngozi had become, nor the pain he had caused the children in his pursuit of status. But Adesiwa was different. She saw him, truly saw him, not as a man with potential or power, but as someone who had suffered and survived. Her understanding of his pain made him feel safe in a way he hadn't for a long time. And it was through her care that Chinedu slowly started to unravel the layers of his guilt. It wasn't just the material wealth he had chased that had poisoned him. It was his own hunger for control, for the illusion of being in charge of his life and fate. In his quest for external power, he had ignored the one thing that would have truly made him free: self-acceptance. One evening, as Chinedu was going through his old letters and documents, he found something that made his blood run cold. It was a letter from his old friend, the oracle, the one who had warned him of the curse and the danger of succumbing to ambition. The letter was dated just after Chinedu had broken the curse. In it, the oracle warned Chinedu that the darkness never truly left, and that it would return in subtle ways, often disguised as something familiar. The words were a chilling reminder that the battle he had fought wasn't over. His desire for control, his fear of loss, and his growing resentment for the life he had left behind, these were all seeds of darkness. And unless he continued to guard himself, they would grow again, stronger than before. This realization sent a wave of fear through Chinedu. Had he really escaped the curse, or was it just lying dormant, waiting for a chance to resurface? Chinedu's world was about to be tested once again. One morning, he received a call from a business partner who had been trying to convince him to return to the world of high finance. They had a new opportunity, one that promised to restore Chinedu's wealth and status, offering him a chance to reclaim everything he had left behind. The offer was tempting. It felt like the universe had given him a second chance at the life he once wanted. But as Chinedu listened, a familiar sensation stirred in him, and a subtle tug at his desires. It was the same feeling that had led him into the darkness before. He knew he had to resist. But the temptation was overwhelming. For a moment, he considered it. Could he really live a simple life forever, free from the allure of power and wealth? Was his new life with Adesewa and the children enough? Adesewa sensed the change in him, and one night, she confronted him. "Chinedu, what's troubling you? I know something is on your mind." For the first time in months, Chinedu admitted the truth: "I'm scared. I'm scared that I'll never be truly free from this darkness. That the things I've left behind will come back to haunt me." Adesewa took his hand, her eyes filled with compassion. "The darkness is real, Chinedu, but it only has power over you if you let it. It's not the life you've lived that defines you, but the choices you make now." Chinedu stood at the crossroads. The business deal was still on the table, and the temptation was stronger than ever. But in that moment, he realized that the true test wasn't about wealth or status, it was about finding peace within himself. He turned down the offer. The allure of power and riches could no longer sway him. He chose love, family, and the life he had built with Adesewa and the children. As the sun set over Lagos, Chinedu stood at the edge of his balcony, looking out at the city below. It was a city filled with dreams and desires, with people chasing after everything they thought would make them happy. But Chinedu knew the truth now. True happiness didn't come from the pursuit of wealth or control, it came from love, laughter, and the peace that could only be found within. And with that, Chinedu embraced the future, one free from the shadows of his past.